I still remember that morning in Union Square like it was burned into my skin. Hundreds of us were packed into the open plaza waiting for what we thought would be a normal company announcement. People whispered about bonuses, about recognition for the brutal quarter we had just survived. I stood there clutching my coffee, telling myself, maybe this time they'll see us. Then Gregory Sloan stepped onto the stage. Perfect suit, polished smile, the kind of confidence that felt rehearsed. And with a single sentence, he crushed the air out of the crowd. There will be no cash bonuses this quarter. For a second, I thought I misheard him. But no, he doubled down, grinning as he held up a stack of glossy tickets. Instead, you're all invited to celebrate my daughter's birthday at Adventureland this weekend, because the best reward is culture. The silence that followed was heavier than any boo. You could see faces twist from hope to disbelief to quiet humiliation. Grown professionals, engineers, analysts reduced to props for a child's party. My chest tightened. Rage mixed with shame, and I forced my jaw to stay locked so no one would see it tremble. In that moment, I knew something inside me had shifted. Not just disappointment, not just anger. It was a line being crossed. A quiet voice telling me, this is the beginning of his fall. Before I tell you how it all unraveled, I want to ask, where are you watching from today? And deeper than that, have you ever stood in a room full of people and felt invisible? Like everything you gave was casually erased? Share it below. Your story might be the one that reminds someone else they're not alone in this. The morning after that announcement in Union Square, our inboxes lit up with a polished memo from HR. The subject line read, "Reimagining incentives for a brighter future." The body of the email was covered with pastel graphics, stock photos of smiling people, and quotes about belonging and shared values. It was supposed to feel inspiring, but reading it, I felt my stomach twist. The memo praised Gregory Sloan for shifting the culture toward community rewards, as if stripping away our bonuses and replacing them with a child's birthday party was some visionary breakthrough. One line in particular burned in my mind. This is not a loss. It is a gift, an opportunity to deepen our culture. I wanted to laugh, but it wasn't funny. I looked around the office and saw the same blank stares on my colleagues' faces. Jasmine, usually the most optimistic among us, muttered, "Are we really just unpaid party planners now?" Nobody answered. In the corner of my desk sat a folder I'd kept for months. Quietly, I had been collecting scraps of Gregory's reckless decisions, unapproved vendor contracts, skipped safety reviews, expenses that never lined up. I called it, half-jokingly, the Sloan file. At first, I thought I kept it to protect myself, just in case. But that morning, something felt different. That folder wasn't a joke anymore. It was becoming a shield, and maybe even a weapon. I told myself to stay calm, to keep my head down, but inside, I could feel the weight shifting. The culture slogans were a mask hiding something uglier, and the mask was starting to crack. As the day went on, the memo spread across chat channels, plastered onto slides, even printed on glossy posters in the hallway. Everywhere I turned, it was the same phrase, "Culture is the new currency." I sat at my desk staring at those words, and I knew one thing for sure. Currency can be faked, but consequences never can. And that's when something happened in the next meeting, something that made me realize just how far Gregory was willing to push the mask of culture. It didn't take long for Gregory to make his next move. A week after the memo, he introduced us to someone new in the Monday leadership meeting. "Everyone," he said with a grin, "meet Chad Mercer, our new legal counsel, old buddy from my college days. He knows how to keep things flexible." The word flexible landed like a warning. Chad walked in wearing an expensive suit, but his swagger gave him away. He wasn't there to protect the company. He was there to protect Gregory. From the very first meeting, I saw the shift. Our old compliance manuals, thick binders that had guided every department for years, were shoved aside. Chad clicked through a flashy slide deck titled Opportunity Navigation Playbook. It looked more like a frat party brochure than a legal framework. Bright colors, buzzwords, and a complete absence of anything resembling rules. Processes slow us down, he said, casually leaning back in his chair. We're moving into an age of trust. If we believe in each other, we don't need fences, we just need flow. Around the table, some managers nodded, eager to please. Others looked away, too nervous to argue. I kept my face neutral, but my mind was racing. Without real protocols, we weren't just vulnerable, we were inviting disaster. Then Gregory, as if to punctuate the moment, pulled out a Nerf gun from under the table. He fired a dart straight at the project timeline pinned to the wall. Laughter rippled through the room, but it felt forced, brittle. "See," he said, "agility. That's leadership." I sat there in silence, hands clenched under the table, thinking, this isn't leadership. This is recklessness dressed as culture. After the meeting, I went back to my desk and quietly exported the audit logs to an encrypted drive. If they were determined to erase the rules, then I needed to keep proof of what was really happening. And just when I thought I had seen the worst of it, I stumbled across something buried in the vendor files, something Chad had conveniently ignored. By then, I had stopped trusting the official files. Everything Chad touched seemed to dissolve into slogans and loopholes. So late one evening, I opened the folder on my desktop that almost no one knew about. I had named it the Silent Folder. Inside were months of quiet notes, screenshots, and contracts that didn't add up. That night, one document caught my eye. A vendor we'd used for years, critical to our compliance systems, had let their certification expire. In plain language, they were no longer authorized to handle sensitive data. But the contract was still active, renewed under Gregory's signature. I printed the page, my hands shaking slightly as I read the timestamp. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. The next morning, I brought it up in a leadership meeting. "This vendor is no longer certified," I said, laying the paper flat on the table. For a second, the room went still. Then Chad smirked and leaned forward. "Certifications are just guidelines," he said smoothly. "We don't need a piece of paper to tell us who we can trust." I looked at Gregory. He didn't even glance at the document. He just waved it off and said, "We're building culture, not cages. I trust them, and I trust me." The dismissal hit harder than I expected, not just because they ignored the risk, but because in that instant, I knew facts no longer mattered to them. Image was all that counted. So I stayed quiet, nodded, and slipped the document back into my folder. That night, I encrypted everything. Emails, logs, even Slack threads, and copied them onto a drive I kept off the company network. If they wanted to erase the truth, I wasn't going to let it vanish so easily. As I closed my laptop, a single thought ran through my mind, like a warning. He thinks he's untouchable. What I didn't know then was how quickly that illusion was about to crack, starting with something as small and as absurd as cupcakes. A few days later, my inbox pinged with something that almost made me laugh out loud. The subject line read, "Mandatory celebration, attendance required." It wasn't about a product launch or a town hall or even a training session. It was an RSVP form for Gregory's daughter's birthday party, complete with a spreadsheet assigning employees to bring cupcakes, balloons, and even superhero costumes. I stared at the screen in disbelief. We were compliance officers, analysts, engineers. People with degrees, certifications, years of experience. And now, apparently, we were supposed to be part-time party planners. Around the office, people whispered nervously. Jasmine shook her head, muttering, "Are we really doing this?" Kevin, who managed vendor audits, was assigned to cupcake logistics. His face went pale. The absurdity would have been comical if it weren't covering something darker. While the office buzzed about sprinkles and frosting, I dug deeper into the vendor files. That's when I noticed something far more alarming. Multiple documents with mismatched signatures, digital seals that didn't align with their timestamp logs, red flags that should have triggered an automatic system alert, yet the alerts had been manually deleted. I sent a brief note to HR and legal. Urgent irregularities detected in vendor compliance. Please advise. Hours passed. No reply. Late that afternoon, a short message finally popped up in my inbox. Let's park this until after the party. We don't want to kill the vibe. That was the moment my frustration hardened into something sharper. We weren't just being ignored, we were being silenced by distraction. Cupcakes had become a shield against accountability. I closed the spreadsheet and opened my encrypted folder. Each piece of evidence felt heavier now, like bricks stacking into a wall. I wasn't sure how or when I'd use them, but I knew this. The party might buy Gregory time, but it wouldn't last forever. Because sooner or later, the game of frosting and balloons would collide head-on with the truth. And that collision started sooner than I expected, inside a closed-door meeting where Gregory crossed a line none of us could ignore. It happened in a conference room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and cheap carpet cleaner. Gregory walked in late, carrying a latte and acting like he owned the air around him. Chad was right behind, already grinning like he knew the punchline to a joke the rest of us hadn't heard yet. We opened the quarterly compliance reports. The numbers weren't great, but they were honest. Missed deadlines, a few gaps in vendor certifications, the reality of a tough quarter. I braced myself for the usual spin, but Gregory leaned forward, tapped the page, and said, almost casually, "What if we smoothed this out, just a little, make it look cleaner for the board?" The room went silent. For a second, I thought maybe I had misheard him. But then he added, "No one reads the fine print anyway. They just want to see progress. We can nudge the data to fit the story." Chad chuckled. "Exactly. It's not lying, it's leadership." I felt heat rise in my chest. This wasn't ignorance, this wasn't bad judgment, this was fraud dressed up as confidence. My hands tightened around the edge of the table, but before I could speak, Tom, our quiet, steady finance manager, snapped his laptop shut. "No," he said firmly, "just one word." Then he opened it again, typed a short message, and hit send. We all heard the ding as the email landed in the board's inbox. "We cannot sign off on these numbers." Gregory's face flushed red. He tried to laugh it off, but it didn't land. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, pulse pounding, knowing we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Because once the board had that email, everything was going to change. And the first sign of fallout arrived faster than I imagined, when meetings began vanishing from our calendars, one after another. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. One morning, I logged into my calendar and noticed a leadership meeting I had been preparing for all week was gone. No cancellation notice, no explanation, just deleted as if it had never existed. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but then another meeting disappeared, then another. By noon, half my week had been wiped clean. Around the office, the atmosphere shifted. People whispered over their screens, side-eyeing one another like we were all waiting for the same storm. Jasmine leaned over my desk and whispered, "Did your meeting with legal just vanish?" I nodded. She exhaled sharply, and neither of us said what we were both thinking. This wasn't an accident. I refreshed my inbox again and again, hoping for clarity. Instead, all I saw were more colorful flyers about the upcoming birthday party. "Adventureland awaits," one read, complete with a cartoon roller coaster. The contrast was almost insulting. Our system was crumbling, and Gregory was obsessed with balloons. By late afternoon, another rumor spread through Slack. Someone claimed a private jet had been spotted on the tarmac at San Francisco International. Word was the chairman himself was flying in unannounced. No official statement, but enough whispers to make the air feel electric. Meanwhile, Gregory strutted through the atrium barking orders about superhero decorations. Chad trailed behind him, pretending to review documents, but really just nodding at everything Greg said. The entire building felt like a carnival, streamers going up, music tests echoing through the hall, while under the surface, every employee knew something bigger was brewing. I sat at my desk, my stomach tight, watching the clock. If the chairman was really on his way, we were running out of time. And that's when I noticed it. An invite that hadn't disappeared. A single meeting still on my calendar. No title, no agenda, just one word, boardroom. When the boardroom invite appeared on my calendar, I knew this was my chance, and maybe my last. That night, long after most people had gone home, I locked myself in a storage room on the lower floor. It was quiet, the hum of the air vents the only sound. I opened my laptop and began to build the one thing Gregory couldn't laugh off, a timeline of truth. 18 hours. That's how long I worked without stopping. I pulled every log, every signature, every deleted alert. The pieces fit together like jagged glass. Vendor contracts signed without authority, certification dates scrubbed, audit trails missing, but traceable in backups I'd saved months before. And then the Slack messages, little jokes that weren't funny anymore. Let's fudge the numbers. Proof in their own words. My hands trembled, sometimes, not from fear, but from focus. Each file I saved felt like another brick laid in a wall they couldn't climb over. This wasn't just insurance anymore. This was the foundation of a reckoning. I copied everything onto a small silver USB drive and slid it into the inner pocket of my blazer. On the label, I wrote only 2 words, page 1, because once the board opened it, the story would write itself from the very first line. I leaned back, exhausted, staring at the folder on my screen before shutting it down. There was no turning back. If I walked into that boardroom, I had to be ready for whatever storm followed. I pressed the USB against my palm, felt the weight of it, and whispered to myself, "This is the lockbox. This is the truth." The next morning, when I walked through the office, balloons were floating in the atrium, and party music echoed down the halls. Everyone was pretending to celebrate, but in my pocket was the one thing they couldn't decorate over. And when I finally stepped into the boardroom, all eyes turned toward me, waiting to see what I would place on the table. The boardroom was nothing like the carnival happening just outside. No balloons, no music, no laughter, just a long, polished table, leather chairs, and the low hum of the air conditioning. When I stepped inside, every head turned. The directors sat stiff and silent, their faces unreadable. At the far end, Gregory leaned back in his chair with that same smug smile, as if this was just another performance he could control. Chad sat next to him, arms crossed, pretending to look confident, but tapping his pen too quickly. I took a seat, reached into my blazer, and placed the silver USB drive on the table. The room seemed to shrink around it. My voice was calm, but my heartbeat was pounding in my ears. "Everything you need begins on page 1, I said. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the directors slid the drive into a laptop. The screen filled with folders, contracts, signatures, logs, Slack captures. Each click echoed louder than the last. As the files opened, the room grew heavier. There it was, contracts signed under Gregory's name without authority. Vendor certifications expired months ago. System alerts scrubbed. Screenshots of chat threads with jokes about massaging the numbers. I didn't need to explain. The evidence spoke for itself. I kept my eyes on the table, letting the silence build. One director shifted uncomfortably. Another pressed a hand against her temple. Even Chad stopped tapping his pen. Gregory, still trying to hold his grin, muttered, "This is all taken out of context." But the words fell flat. No one laughed this time. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the truth hang in the air like smoke no one could wave away. And as the chairman leaned forward, eyes fixed on Gregory, I realized the mask was finally slipping. What happened next would no longer be quiet at all, because the reckoning was about to spill out into the open where everyone could see. The moment the boardroom doors opened, I knew the storm was about to break. The muffled music from the atrium spilled in cheerful superhero songs, clashing with the silence we had just left behind. Gregory walked out first, shoulders stiff, his forced smile plastered back on as if nothing had happened. Chad trailed behind him, face pale, no trace of his usual swagger. Employees were already gathered in the atrium, arms full of balloons and trays of cupcakes. The giant Adventureland banner hung across the ceiling. To them, it was just another absurd party. They didn't know what had been said upstairs. Gregory grabbed a microphone, tapping it with false confidence. Thank you all for joining. Today isn't just about culture. It's about family. My leadership is your leadership. And together... He never finished. The chairman stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, his voice steady, cutting through the noise. Gregory Sloan, you are relieved of duty, effective immediately. The atrium froze. The music cut off mid-beat. A balloon slipped from someone's hand and popped against the floor. Gregory stammered, trying to laugh. This must be some mistake. But no one moved to help him. Security stepped forward, not rushing, just steady professional. The kind of silence that followed shame spread across the room. For the first time, employees weren't looking at Gregory with fear or forced loyalty. They were looking at him with recognition, finally seeing the truth. He tried to keep talking, voice cracking, but the chairman didn't give him another chance. This company deserves leadership rooted in integrity, not theater. And just like that, the mask was gone. Gregory was escorted through the atrium, past the cupcakes, past the decorations, past the very people he thought he controlled. His footsteps echoed louder than any applause. I stood among the crowd, my heart pounding, watching the unmasking unfold in public view. But even as the relief spread, I knew this wasn't the end. Removing him was only the beginning. The question was, what would be left standing when the dust settled? The atrium emptied slowly after Gregory was escorted out, but the silence lingered long after the balloons stopped bouncing on the floor. People drifted back to their desks in small groups, whispering, as if afraid their voices might wake the ghosts of what just happened. The decorations still hung, mocking in their cheerfulness. Half-eaten cupcakes sat abandoned on trays, their frosting smudged and forgotten. I walked back to my office in a daze. For months, I had carried that silent folder like a weight. Now the weight had shifted, but it wasn't gone. The evidence had spoken yes. The chairman had acted. But inside, I felt a strange mix. Relief wrapped in exhaustion, satisfaction tangled with something I couldn't quite name. My inbox pinged. A short message from the board's secretary. Effective immediately, you are appointed Director of Compliance. Please confirm availability for tomorrow's transition briefing. No celebration, no fanfare. Just words on a screen. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the title I had earned the hard way. A part of me wanted to smile, but I didn't. Power wasn't what I had chased. Survival was. Integrity was. And now I was responsible for more than just myself. Through the glass wall, I saw Jasmine slip her badge onto her desk and exhale like she had been holding her breath for weeks. Kevin sat frozen still in his ridiculous party committee t-shirt, staring at the floor. The whole office felt suspended between shock and renewal, like no one knew whether to cheer or mourn. I closed my laptop, gently slid the silver USB back into my pocket, and whispered to myself, not fireworks, just quiet. That was the victory I wanted. Not spectacle, not revenge shouted from rooftops, just truth, finally standing on its own. But even as I breathed out, a thought crept in. Removing Gregory was only the first battle. The systems he broke, the trust he shattered, they still needed repair. And as I prepared to leave for the night, I noticed an envelope slipped under my door. No sender, no mark, just my name written in heavy ink. The envelope under my door turned out to be nothing dramatic, just a handwritten thank you from the chairman. A simple note that said, "You did the right thing. Quiet strength matters." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my drawer. Gregory disappeared from the company overnight. No farewell email, no LinkedIn announcement, just gone. Chad tried to stay for a while, but without Gregory's shadow to hide under, he resigned within the month. The Adventureland banners were torn down the next morning, leaving tape marks on the walls that no one bothered to clean. As for the rest of us, it took time to breathe again. Jasmine eventually returned to her desk with a little more confidence. Kevin stopped flinching whenever compliance reports were mentioned. The office slowly began to feel like a workplace again, not a stage for someone else's ego. And me? I stepped into my new role carefully, not with speeches or slogans, but with the one thing we had been missing: consistency. I reopened the old manuals, restored the alerts, and reminded people that rules weren't cages, they were seatbelts. Silent, maybe inconvenient, but life-saving when the crash comes. Looking back, the hardest part wasn't facing Gregory. It was surviving the months where I felt invisible, where truth didn't seem to matter. That's the weight most people carry at work, not the loud betrayals, but the quiet erasures. If there's a lesson here, it's this: silence has power. The notes you keep, the patience you hold, the evidence you guard, they can become the turning point when the world finally catches up. You don't always need to shout to be heard. Sometimes you just need to be steady enough to outlast the noise. So now I'll ask you, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever seen someone hide behind culture or charisma while breaking the very rules that keep everyone safe? Share your thoughts below. Your voice might be the reminder someone else needs to hear today.